Good evening. I'm Chris Brown, and I have the privilege of serving as the John and Adrienne Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Welcome to our revitalized museum here on the National Mall and this year's Amelia Earhart Lecture in Aviation History. And greetings as well to everyone joining us online. This program is our premier aviation lecture held each spring, named after Amelia Earhart. She was one of the most well-known aviators of all time, and her story has sparked an interest in aviation for millions of people worldwide from the 1920s until this very day. Today is the 94th anniversary of Earhart leaving on her flight from Newfoundland to Northern Ireland to become the first woman to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic. We hold this marquee aviation lecture each year to honor her legacy, hosting speakers from all facets of aviation to share their stories. In this year's lecture, we are pleased to have three speakers from the United States Air Force Reserve's 53rd Reconnaissance Squadron. This squadron flies through Earth's worst weather, earning them the name Hurricane Hunters. For over 80 years, the United States Air Force Reserve has tracked weather across the Atlantic. Today, the Hurricane Hunters of the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron are the only operational military unit in the world flying weather reconnaissance on a routine basis. Using their fleet of WC-130J aircraft, known as the Super Hercules, the Air Force's Hurricane Hunters survey tropical storms, hurricanes, and even winter storms. Their special aircraft are equipped with meteorological data gathering instruments that help to perform these storms tracking aerial missions. Joining us on the panel are Lieutenant Colonel David Gentile, Captain Jenny White, and Major Amanda Nelson. Lieutenant Colonel David Gentile is the commander of the 53rd, leading, mentoring, and training over 100 assigned personnel. He is a command pilot with over 4,000 hours in the C-130 aircraft. Captain Jenny White is an aerial reconnaissance weather officer, directing operational overwater aerial weather reconnaissance missions as an aircrew meteorologist. Major Amanda Nelson is an aerial reconnaissance weather officer directing a 5-member crew on tropical and winter storm reconnaissance missions. She also leads the unit's scientific advancement initiatives. Thank you for being here, David, Jenny, and Amanda. I look forward to hearing about your unique flight experiences this evening. Their conversation will be moderated by Dr. Mike Hankins, National Air and Space Museum Curator of U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps post-World War II aviation. Before we get started, though, I want to especially thank our friends at RTX, who have been our generous sponsor for our marquee aviation lecture for many years and are our sponsor again tonight. We appreciate your help as we continue to share aviation history with our audiences in person and online. And joining us in the audience tonight is Jen Thomas, the Engineering Chief of Staff at RTX. Welcome, Jen, and thank you to you and the entire RTX team for your support. And with that, it's time to start this evening's lecture. And while our speakers come up to the stage, we'll watch a short video about the museum's 50th anniversary this year. Thank you.
This beautiful new museum and its exciting exhibits of the mastery of air and space is a perfect birthday present from the American people to themselves.
In 1976, we open our doors on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., taking our visitors on a journey through the sky and out into space.
Shall we touch a piece of the moon?
For the last 50 years, we have welcomed hundreds of millions through our doors, conserved, restored, and safeguarded priceless artifacts brought history makers to you. Opened new exhibitions. Acquired new artifacts to document the past, present, and future of aerospace. And helped inspire a new generation of innovators and explorers. The last 50 years have been incredible. We cannot wait to see what the next 50 years hold.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. My name, as you mentioned, was Mike Hankins. I'm the curator for post-World War II military aviation here. We're so excited you're here. Before we dive in, I want to make sure you see the QR code that we have on the screen. If you would like to submit a question, we'll do some Q&A at the end, and we'd love to hear from y'all. So please feel free to submit a question that way. You can do that if you're watching online, and we're glad you are. When you can do that if you're here in person. And if you are here in person, you have something in common with our guests tonight. You are not scared of a little bit of weather. So thank you for being here. Which leads me to ask, and I want to make sure I understand this. Y'all get into airplanes and you fly them into hurricanes, and you do this on purpose, right? How many hurricanes have y'all flown into?
So I have flown through a hurricane 58 times.
Just shy of 100.
And I'm right at 48.
All right, well, 48. Yes, yes, please. That is worthy of applause. Wow, that is amazing. So my next question is obviously, did you volunteer for this, or did they just tell you? Can we go down the line? Tell us a little bit about how you got into this role, what your background is, and maybe why you do this.
Absolutely. So I did volunteer for this. We all did. So our squadron's actually a reserve squadron. So as opposed to active duty, where you're provided an assignment, you choose to go here. So yeah, we all chose to come here. I was active duty weather previously. I'm one of the meteorologists. That's what aerial reconnaissance weather officer stands for. I'm with the meteorologist on the plane along with Jenny. And I did forecasting on the ground. I also forecasted for typhoons in the Western Pacific. And I thought, wow, that'd be really cool to provide the information that's inside of the hurricane to forecasters on the ground. So I've been with the unit about 4 years.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I've been with the unit since 2017, also a volunteer for it. I've flown C-130s since about 2009. Absolutely love it. I have about 4,000 hours flying them, and there's a few special missions floating around the C-130 community. One of them is MAFS, which is the forest fire mission. Another one is up in Schenectady, New York, where they land on the glaciers in Antarctica, and then the other big one is this one. And I always told myself if I ever got the opportunity in my life to do any of those special missions, I would jump at it. And I got a chance to do the hurricane mission, moved down from Charlotte to Mississippi specifically for it back in 2017. And I've been doing it for almost 9 years and absolutely love it.
I was also a weather officer, just like Major Nelson was. I was originally stationed at Minot Air Force Base for 4 years when I first joined the Air Force. And I always knew the Hurricane Hunter Squadron existed, but I never knew exactly how to get here or how you'd apply or how do people do this. So after 4 years in Minot and dealing with the opposite of this weather, very cold, very snowy, I heard that there was an opportunity to interview to be a weather officer with the 53rd. So right away, I took that because it's something I wanted to do for a very long time. And now I've been with the unit since 2019.
Fantastic. My next question, I think what probably most of us are thinking is, why would you do this? What? I'm sure you're not doing it for fun, or maybe you are. I don't know. But why would you be flying airplanes into hurricanes in the first place? What are we getting out of that?
So essentially, we are getting information inside of a hurricane that you can't get any other way. We'll dive, I'm sure, into it a little bit more as far as what we're getting. We're getting temperature, humidity, winds. And then we also, so we have a horizontal profile of the atmosphere. We're flying at 10,000 feet. So we're actually going through, we're not over. We are going at 10,000 feet straight through the hurricane. But we also drop instruments called dropsondes, and that gets us a vertical profile of the atmosphere all the way down to the surface of the ocean. And so again, that's providing temperature, humidity, winds, and that's information that you can't get another way.
That's fantastic. Can you explain a little bit more about what the dropsonde is, and like, is it a big thing? Do you drop a ton of them at once, or is there only one, or how do those work?
Do you want to take that, Jenny?
Sure. So the dropsondes are really cool. We like to think of it as like a reverse weather balloon. So instead of getting data as the balloon goes up, we're getting data as the dropsonde goes down. So like you can see in the picture, it looks and it's shaped a lot like a paper towel tube. And inside of there is lots of weather sensors as well as a parachute. So we have a special tube on the airplane that we launch these from. And they go from 10,000 feet where we fly all the way down to the surface. And these gather temperature data, dew point, pressure, wind speed, wind direction, location, really important things that the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center want to see and want to know for their forecasts. And we'll launch about, in a single hurricane, close to 20 of these dropsondes along our flight path.
That's fantastic. So you've mentioned what kind of data we're getting, all this information. What happens to that? Like, where does it go? Does it help us? Like, is this data informing like the weather forecast that we see when we get warnings and stuff? How does that filter down?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the whole point. I mean, we do enjoy flying into hurricanes, I think. I know, especially as a meteorologist. I mean, it's a really cool job. But we're not just crazy. We also are doing it to help the entire public. So essentially, the information we gather, we send off in real time back to the National Hurricane Center, and it's used in multiple ways. So it gets assimilated. All of the information goes into weather prediction models that you'll see, on broadcasts and such like that. But it also goes straight to the forecasters so they can inform their forecast in the moment, and it can all go out to emergency managers, local officials, so that as the hurricane is moving in, it improves that forecast so that you can trust the evacuation orders and people know what to do.
Yeah, that's really important. So that's fantastic. You mentioned that you can't get this data any other way. So I imagine like we have weather satellites, we have other things. What is it about being inside the storm that makes it important that we can't get another way?
So for weather satellites, there's multiple different kinds, right? So you can think of some, like it's just a picture from above. You're just seeing the top of the clouds. Then there's other types that are microwave sensors where you can see a bit of the structure, but you don't get those images as frequently. Additionally, it's really hard to get all the way down to the ocean surface to have high fidelity and know what those wind speeds are, what the pressure is, and how it's changing. So yeah, that type of information can't be seen from a satellite.
Yeah. So I'm curious about how these missions are structured, because you're a meteorologist, correct? And you're a pilot. What are the kind of crew complement? Like, what are all the different roles that you have? How many people are on a crew? What are the different jobs? And how do y'all interact when you're on one of these flights?
I can take that one. Essentially, you have the pilot and co-pilot up front. Our job is basically to drive the bus and make sure that the mission gets from the ground and back to the ground through the storm as safely as possible. And we kind of help mitigate the risks as far as depending on how much the data is needed and what the threat level is and how severe the storm is as to whether we are able to penetrate it, which is the normal method, or maybe hit it with radar and do the best that we can, avoid certain sectors. We're kind of driving the bus. The weather officer in the back, the meteorologist, they're the ones with the most actual weather knowledge. They're kind of the science lead for the mission. And then in between them and the pilots is a navigator who is basically going to take a look at the radar as me and the other pilot are flying the aircraft, analyze the direction that they suggest going based on the specific amount of data they want, and they're going to do a detailed analysis of the radar, looking for hook echoes, water spouts, tornadoes, extreme turbulence, lightning, things that would be ill-advised to fly through, and then their job is to try to sort of plot us the least worst possible way to get to where they want to go, and then our job is to then take that and drive it there. And then along with that team, you've got a drop sound operator / load master who is sitting next to them in the back, who is the one who's physically loading the drop tube, prepping it, launching. It basically looks like a 30-06 rifle barrel. They open this thing, they throw in the little shell drops on thing, latch it down, then they open a valve with the negative pressure and it sucks it out and it falls from the parachute at 10,000 down to the surface. The load also will help them to sort of calculate that data, clean it up, send it to them, and then they do a final sanity check on it, clean it up, put it into a position that CARCA needs, and then finally send it off to the National Hurricane Center, all in real time. And we'll do this basically at multiple points: the four corners of the storm, the four corners of the eye wall, and then the most important one, the specific center point. Like when you have a clear eye wall, you can't see that on radar. That's where the sort of team effort of what we do kind of comes into place. Of, as a team, we find the lowest center of pressure and the zero wind point, mark that center point, and send it to them so they know if it's shifting and if they need to reach out to somebody and tell them that an area that wasn't affected now is.
I have a lot of follow-up questions. That is fascinating. And I want to make sure we all heard him say that he's dodging tornadoes while he's flying through the hurricane. This is amazing. You're using a lot of terms like the eye wall. You're talking about going into the eye, going through this. You're talking about the structure of a storm. I don't know a whole lot about meteorology. Help us understand, how does the hurricane work? When you talk about its structure, what do you mean? Like how is a hurricane structured, and what are you looking at when you're flying through it like that?
So I'd say the thing that we care about the most is seeing like the eye wall, the winds there, because that's typically where you see the strongest winds. And then, like they said, the very center of the eye. So that's our main focus. We're gathering data just outside that eye wall, in the center of the eye wall, in the center of the eye, and then we do that pass several times through the storm. So those are the main portions of it that we're concerned about and where the data is most helpful.
Yeah, so in addition to that, just as far as structure goes, so you've got the eye in the center of the eye wall, and then a hurricane can range in size significantly. There can be very small storms that can still pack a punch, don't get me wrong, where it makes landfall, but it doesn't have that same breadth. And then there can be some that have a very wide wind field. So really each storm is unique in its structure, and that's another good reason that we go in there, is to map the wind field at the very least at flight level and then send that back as well.
Yeah. So what does it feel like to do all this? Maybe just to be on the plane, or especially to be flying the plane. You know, we've all experienced some turbulence, I'm sure. It's probably very different than that. What is your experience like just being there, and what are you feeling and sensing when you're in one of these things?
Sure. It varies drastically between the severity of the storm and whether it's fully formed and mature, or whether it's in a building or a declining stage. Once it's fully mature, it's a lot more predictable. The worst turbulence typically is going to be as it's sort of falling apart or as it's still rapidly intensifying. That's where you're going to get the most wind shear, which is that sort of seat drop, sort of like Tower of Terror Disney feel, where the plane kind of drops, or you get the big unplanned direction changes where it pitches and rolls in different directions, and you have to kind of nudge it gently or not so gently back to where you want it to be. But then when you pop through the actual eye wall, which is usually the strongest weather, it's really neat because it just goes from the maximum wind strength and shear to almost nothing instantly, and it's just this nice sort of smooth. Mm-hmm. Clear, I think they'll have a couple of pictures of it rolling through, but just sort of calm in the center of the storm.
Yeah, and I'd say our experience, at least I know mine, in the back is a little different because we are in the back, we have a very small window. We always joke like we're the meteorologists, but we have the worst view. And so we also are extremely busy during that time. So whenever I get that question, sometimes it is really bumpy. Like he was saying, it's when it's in those transitional stages or making landfall. Those can also be really bumpy. But we are really busy at that time because we're gathering all the information in the eye wall and then through the eye and creating products to send off the aircraft. So it's really, it's a perfect time to be busy and trust the front of the plane to do their job, and they're well trained to do it.
And a lot of it's looking at little numbers too. We're dealing with data, and so when people ask what my job is like, I say I'm looking at a bouncing spreadsheet in the sky, and that poses its own challenges. Sometimes we'll be writing down numbers on a little worksheet, and you'll look at the worksheet after the flight, and you're like, that is very sloppy handwriting. But that is what it's like. So we're very focused the whole time, and so some of those drops can kind of catch you off guard sometimes. So overall, pretty bumpy in the developing ones, I'd say.
I really like the term that you said, unplanned direction changes. I think I might use that later on. I think some people might be surprised that this is a military operation, right? This is something that you are all National Guard. And the military has been doing this and has been for some time. Why is the military interested in this? Why is this considered a military mission that the Air Force is partaking in?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. From the overall national security standpoint, is literally the security of our folks, of our people living in the coastal communities. There's a substantial dollar value as well attached to evacuation orders. Like if you evacuated somewhere, and this is probably a little older data, but it's like $1 million per square mile of coastline or whatever for issuing an evacuation order. So if you can take that swath from like 50 miles down to 30 miles, that's a significant cost savings in resources, for one. But for another one, and this is to me the more important end, is what I kind of call the cry wolf syndrome, of where like if you tell people in a coastal community like, hey, you need to evacuate like 4 or 5 times, and then every time you tell them, 90% of the time they don't have to really evacuate, nothing happens, they're going to not believe you the next time. So by narrowing that ellipse down and getting to the point that we're making it a lot more trustworthy, like, hey, when they say that this is now the time to evacuate, or this is the level of threat that you're going to experience, it gets people to pay more attention to it and to take it more seriously. So you don't end up putting first responders' lives at risk, putting folks in a position where by the time they decide, oh, wow, they were actually right, maybe we should have left. Now the roads are barricaded or it's closed down, traffic's gridlocked and they can't get out. So the biggest reason is to get folks the chance to make an informed decision and either evacuate or take preparations before severe weather hits.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long has this been going on? Has the military always been doing these kind of missions, or about when did this start? How did it develop?
So the military actually has a long history of weather reconnaissance. The military has been able to observe weather and use its information since we've had airplanes. And our unit, specifically the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, has been around since 1944. So we are about 82 years old. And our squadron has looked a few different ways over the years and changed over the decades, especially our planes. We used to fly B-17s and B-25s through hurricanes before our WC-130Js now. But the military has quite the heritage, and now we are the last weather reconnaissance squadron in the military, and we're the only ones that fly through hurricanes in the military.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you mentioned the WC-130. So let's talk about, we're all airplane nerds here, I would think, right? Let's talk a little bit about the airplane. What is it about the C-130 that makes it so useful in this mission and particularly good for it?
The C-130 is a very older design. It was created in the 50s, and it's been in service pretty much continuously from like the mid to early 60s through now in various different platforms. It's really, really well made for low altitude, low speed operations. So the stuff that we do in the hurricane, we typically go in at 10,000 feet, which is going to be below the level of icing, but high enough to react to adverse situations like engine trouble or extreme turbulence. And the fact that it has propellers that are driven by jet engines as opposed to just a pure jet like you'd see on an airliner, it creates what's called a blown wing, where it sort of creates its own lift. By having a propeller and a gearbox attached to a jet engine instead of a high bypass like you get with an airline, you lose efficiency and speed, so it's terrible at high altitudes and it's really slow, but it's extremely responsive. So when you end up with plus or minus 20 to 40 knot wind shear, which could be disastrous for a swept wing airliner that's designed to fly at high speeds and high altitudes, we have the ability to instantly generate more power and more lift over the wing to recover from those severe bouts of turbulence. So it's not specifically designed to fly into hurricanes, but the way that it is built makes it very well suited for this mission.
I imagine you're making a ton of adjustments constantly. It's not like you can hit the autopilot. There's not an auto hurricane button.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that. The autopilot's not terrible. It's a lot better than it used to be. Our standard operating procedure is to use the autopilot to the max extent possible. So up until you start getting above the moderate turbulence level, it does a pretty good job. Now, it is moving, like you'll watch the throttles. Our throttle sticks will basically move by computer to make adjustments, just like your cruise control on the highway, or when somebody cuts you off, if you have the nice new adaptive cruise control, it'll make adjustments. It does a lot of that for us, but once you get to above like the moderate turbulence level, it really can't keep up. And once it gets to the point that it can't keep up, it'll just stop working and shut off. So that's why you're constantly shadowing the controls, and as soon as it shuts off, you'll either call for the other pilot to reach up on the dashboard and turn it back on, or if it keeps shutting off, like it's just super bad turbulence, then you'll just hand fly it the whole time. And if it gets too extreme, you can split it up, and one pilot will basically control the yoke and rudders, and the other pilot will just basically be on the throttles, working until you can get out of that specifically rough patch. And then you'll re-automate as quick as you can once it gets to a stable point, just so you can kind of get a better picture of what's going on without having to hand fly everything.
Wow, that sounds really intense. I would love to hear kind of from each of you, if there's a particular mission that is particularly memorable for you or that sticks out for any reason. But just if you could paint a picture for us of like maybe a typical mission, but one that jumps out in your mind.
All right, I'll go first. So Hurricane Milton is definitely the one that jumps out the most to me. So that was 2024, October. I had gotten certified in July, so relatively new to it still, hadn't flown in a ton of hurricanes. And this one, we're told what to expect by the forecaster. That's part of our brief beforehand, what they think the storm is going to be. And so we were briefed we'd expect about 90 knots when we got out there at flight level and 970 millibars in the center. Well, we got out there and it was 943 millibars, which is significantly less than it was projected to be. And over the course, we flew through the center 5 times. And over the course of that time, in 6 hours, it lost 35 millibars of pressure and was down to 912, which is like a sub 900 is very rare for a hurricane. So just to put it in perspective, meteorology wise. And when they're rapidly intensifying like that, you can get a lot of interesting weather. And so we went through, and I remember, first of all, we're flying at pressure altitude. So when you're going into, it was a small eye, so the eyes can vary anywhere from very large to like 40 nautical miles down to very small. And this one was 8 nautical miles when we were going through it. And you're flying pressure altitude. So basically you're like going down when you're in a very intense hurricane, and it felt like we were descending, going into land, and that's just what the plane's doing because you're following the pressure level. And I was like, whoa, this is a lot. And then we had hail on top of it. And then the last thing was we were in the eye, and the pilot was like, I see birds. And I looked out the window, and at like 2,000 feet below us, I was like, I see birds too. And only on debrief later, they had birds closer than 2,000 feet. So there were birds all in this small eye, and it was just a very remarkable flight. I was like, wow, that was interesting. But it also highlights why we do this, right? Because it rapidly intensified. It was nearing, it didn't make landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula, but it was near. And so the difference between that being a Cat 2 and a Cat 5 hurricane off the coast is big. So, yeah. All right, next.
Mine was definitely Hurricane Michael. It was my first season flying with the unit towards the end of it, so I'd gotten trained, gotten certified, but hadn't flown a whole lot of big Cat 5s. I think it was my second or third Cat 5 that I'd ever flown. And the first 4 passes were out to sea, and they were uneventful for a Cat 5. They were more predictable, more normal. When it got close to shore, they asked us to start doing shore patrol, which is they basically want to make sure that it's not going to jink at the last minute when it interacts with land, hook in a certain direction, and they want to know so they can give early warning as quickly as possible. So they'll have, instead of flying the alpha pattern, which is like this big pentagram sort of shaped deal, it's basically just going back and forth like a banner tower where you're hitting the eye wall over and over and over again, like every 10 minutes running along the shoreline. And once it starts interacting with land, like the last pass that we went through, the shear from interacting with land got so bad that we basically got stuck in the eye wall. We were getting plus or minus 10 degrees of pitch, plus or minus 30, 40 degrees of rotation, airspeed changes of almost 50 knots. At one point, the autopilot and autothrottles kicked off, and they were taking a video of it behind me, and the little autopilot thing was going off. And it took me like 10 seconds to shut it off because you just channelize. Like I didn't even hear the thing talking. I was just looking at airspeed and attitude and everything else. So we ended up in the eye wall orbiting for probably 10 minutes, just watching it eat Mexico Beach and go, because normally when it's over land, you're not there. But it was so bad. Everything was purple and red all the way around the ring. So we just basically started doing turns for about 20, 30 minutes trying to figure out, okay, where is the least bad section? Because we're going to have to go through this to get out of it. And just going over that, you got a unique view of what it looks like over land. Because normally when it gets to land, we break off and go away. In that particular one, like you actually got to see the level of damage as it was going over the land. You could see the trees folded over. You could see the houses getting splintered as you're trying to basically figure out how to get out of it. And then my wife and I actually lived, this was in about maybe a couple hundred miles from Biloxi. We went down with a mission group from our church about 10 days later. And it was like tornado level destruction. Like normally with a tornado, you'll get mass destruction for 100 yards and then next to it, it's clear. This was like 4 miles across and 20 miles deep of every tree was snapped over. Everything that wasn't made of stone was basically obliterated. So seeing that up close was probably the most intense one that I remember.
So my most memorable storm, believe it or not, was not a big, huge hurricane. It was not a Cat 4. It wasn't a Cat 5. It was actually a tropical storm, and I'll explain why. Back in 2020, so the most active hurricane season on record, we were tasked to fly what's called an INVEST mission, or an investigative mission, and our job with that is to just fly out to an area of tropical disturbance that the National Hurricane Center is interested in because they think this maybe could become something. And so our job is to fly out and see if there's any circulation in those storms. Are the winds blowing in a circle? And so before we got onto the plane and left, you think it can go one of two ways. Either you can get out there, you find circulation, you let the forecasters know, and perhaps it turns into something. Or you get out there, there's no circulation, and in a couple of weeks it may die out and become nothing. But that's our job. And so that's what we were going to go out there and do. And so I'm thinking this might be, fairly chill. When you're out there, you look out the window, you might see a few puffy clouds. There's nothing too crazy on the radar. And so we're almost to the coordinates that the National Hurricane Center gave us that they were interested in. We were almost there. And I happened to look up on the radar screen, and in the corner, I see a closed eye wall. A completely closed eye wall. You can see the eye in the middle, the radar ring around it, and that was Tropical Storm Nana. But nobody knew it was Tropical Storm Nana, and it went on to become Hurricane Nana, which affected southern Mexico and Belize. But for me, it was the most memorable because, I mean, it opened my eyes to just how important weather reconnaissance is, because even with our expensive satellites and our ground stations and radar and all the technology we have now, nobody knew that it was already a tropical storm in the southern Gulf until we flew out there and observed it for ourselves.
Those are amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. And that really speaks to how important this role is in helping people like us get warning about these things, which makes me curious, how far out generally, obviously you're saying sometimes before it even develops, you want to go investigate it. Sometimes you're seeing it over land. Generally, how far out do you go for hurricane, from land, say, to try to get information on it before it hits? Is there kind of a general range?
So we will be tasked for the hurricane mission specifically. We're tasked by the National Hurricane Center. So they will be the ones who look and decide. Now there's specific requirements, I'm sure that they're following, but it's all laid out in the National Hurricane Operations Plan as to how frequently we fly, depending on how close it is to land. So as something is coming across the Atlantic, we have a line, it's 52.5. And once it crosses there, and really a lot of that is because the reach, like you said, we fly kind of slow. So like we can only reach so far into the Atlantic. So we will fly it, like say, if it's something in the Gulf, we're always going to fly it. We'll start flying it as soon as it's maybe going to become something. So like Jenny said, if it's an invest, we'll go out and investigate, say there's no circulation at that time. So a low pressure is counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. So what we're looking for is a counterclockwise circulation. If we don't find that, then and they still think it's going to develop in a couple of days, then we'll go out the next day usually and fly it again. And then we fly it through the entire life cycle, but how frequently we fly it depends on how close it is to land, where it is, and a couple different parameters. Is there anything I missed?
No, that's a pretty good hit on it. Just to piggyback on it, it's like a lot of our job, like 85 to 90% of it is actually pretty boring. It's like what you want. It's like, go out there and look at this. Okay, good, it's nothing. But if it's not nothing, we're out there to make sure that they're getting the updates as quick as possible.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're doing that. Thank you. I understand that maybe there's some other missions you do as well that aren't always hurricane related. Is there a winter storm? Do you ever fly in those kind of different colder conditions or blizzards and things like that?
We absolutely do. So we are not just hanging out in the winter. So we actually have 2 operational seasons and our operational 10 months out of the year. So our winter season goes from the 1st of November to the end of March. And we go, what it's been for the past 5+ years is that for 2 months out of the year, we are stationing out of California and we're flying into the Eastern Pacific, essentially. And on those, they're customized tracks. And we're flying a lot of atmospheric rivers, which if there's anyone from the West Coast, they're probably familiar with that phenomenon. Essentially, it's a lot of water that's coming in at the mid-levels, heavy rainfall, heavy snowfall. And where that rainfall or snowfall is going to happen is absolutely critical for water resource and reservoir management. So that's a lot of what we're out there to do, because we'll drop about 25 to 30 drop-ons during that mission, and it improves the model solution significantly so that they can make informed decisions on whether they need to release water or hold on to it. And then in addition to that, we won't only fly those. There also sometimes we'll fly in the Gulf and sometimes tracks off the Atlantic, but a lot of our mission has now moved to the Eastern Pacific to do both atmospheric rivers, but then also upstream features. So This year we flew a couple features that in 3 to 4 days became nor'easters and heavy snowfall in the East Coast, and essentially improved the model solution there as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of it that, water management techniques come from a lot of the research and data that y'all are getting. Is it a different experience, flying in a blizzard condition rather than a hurricane? What makes it unique?
Yes, it's very different. I mean, we're not seeing the same levels of turbulence that we see flying through a hurricane. And those, we usually fly at a higher altitude as well. So we're closer to like 29,000, 30,000 feet for those missions, whereas the hurricane mission, we're at about 10,000 feet. So we fly higher, we drop a few more drop sons. Those are really critical in getting the data, and just definitely not as bumpy and a little colder.
I'm really curious how you go about training for something like this, because it seems like such a unique role. I don't guess you have hurricane simulators or anything like that. How do you go about the training process for this?
It varies greatly by crew position. From the pilot side of the house, we do have some homegrown folks that we bring in off the street. We send them to pilot training. They learn how to fly get Air Force pilot wings, learn how to fly the C-130, and then they come to us, and within the 6 to 9 months, they're basically flying operational missions. The weather side of the house is a whole nother story. They have, because of the advanced meteorology degrees, they probably have the longest training footprint. If you guys want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is the only position in the Air Force where you can fly as a weather officer. So every meteorologist that comes in first has to go through all of the air crew training. So we initially go through all of that, and then we do a basic qualification first before you even really are focusing on the mission, like a hurricane mission. And that's so that you can get used to working in a crew. For anyone who's flies or is in aviation, like the crew complement is absolutely critical. So we have to get used to that. We have to give students time to adjust to that. And then so that's about 4 months. And then you have what we call a prog tour, so you're progressing. So then you're qualified, but you're flying on your own, but you're still not flying hurricanes. But you can fly the winter missions because they are, there's just slightly less required as far as mission directing. You're still doing it, but it's not as complicated. And then finally, you'll get into your hurricane training. And you have to have like 12 to 14 hurricane or tropical storm flights, and that takes about 1.5 years. Was that your experience?
Well, I ended up doing my hurricane training in 2020, which was the most activity on record. So I actually was able to get the hurricane cert pretty quickly because we kept having hurricanes and storm pops up. So I'd land from one and they'd be like, "Are you ready to fly the next one?" I'd say, "Yeah, let's go." And so mine was actually a little bit faster than that just because of the season. But that's the thing with flying weather is you are dependent on what the weather is doing, what the season looks like. So it kind of varies from student to student.
So basically, on average, depending on the storm season and everything, it probably takes between 2.5 to 3.5 years to build like a seasoned basic crew member for any real crew position. So as far as when you first get hired and get in the door, you probably got about 2-ish years before you're able to fully operate on your own without assistance from an instructor and be like fully mission ready.
Very cool. We're going to move to audience Q&A in a second because we want to hear from y'all. Just want to remind you to use the QR code to submit a question if you'd like. Those will pop up to us down here so we can see them. But before we do that, while you're getting your questions together, just one more question for all of y'all, if we could go down the line. Is there any, and this is a hard question, so maybe it's not fair, but if there's any one thing that you wish people knew or understood about your job or maybe about hurricanes in general, what would you like us to know?
So I would say for anyone in a hurricane-prone area to prepare early. By the time something's formed and the cone is aiming towards your location, you can still gather a couple things, but you're really, really behind the power curve. So like I said at the beginning, we're up there for a reason. You know, it is interesting, but we're really there to get the data to improve the forecast. So we want people to be prepared. So setting up hurricane boxes, knowing where you're going to go if you have to evacuate, making a plan, that's really critical as we go into hurricane season starting in just a little over a week.
Yeah, pretty much same as you said. Like the time to have the plan is when it's calm, because when everything's going haywire is not the time to try to figure out what you want to do.
Agreed. I would say we've talked about a lot of really cool and exciting things tonight, like flying through hurricanes and turbulence, but we don't just do this for fun. We do this because the people on the ground, we want them safe, and we care about them being safe. So I have one very actionable thing that everybody here and online can do before the hurricane season starts, and that's to go to the National Hurricane Center's website and bookmark it. Bookmark it on your phone, on your computer, on your laptop. The National Hurricane Center is the source, the authority for all things hurricanes. That's the best information you're going to get. That's where our data goes, right from the airplane. So that website is nhc.noaa.gov. So nhc.noaa.gov. And find that link early before the season starts. And if you're not in an area affected by hurricanes, share that link with somebody you know who is, a friend or a family member, because what better way to help them prepare?
And I guess one thing I forgot to mention too about that is when you do live in an area that's hurricane prone and you do get a hurricane evacuation order, not everybody leaves. But don't just think about yourself. Don't just think about, well, I made it through the last few fine. Think about the disaster response folks. Think about your family members who you could affect by that decision. Bottom line, if they've gotten to the point that they're issuing an evacuation order, please listen to them, because you're not only risking your own life, but you're putting others at risk as well, who then have to come in and try to help you when things go bad.
Yeah, those are really great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. That's really important. Yes, please. We're so grateful for the work that you're doing. And no doubt there's a lot of people that are alive today that might not have been without the data that you've gathered. So thank you. We got a lot of great questions here. I really am excited to dive in. Please keep them coming. There's some good stuff. Of course, the number one question, it looks like from this, is something I thought about but was afraid to ask, and that is, how much is your job like the movie Twisters, or if you're old like me, the original Twister, singular?
So honestly, not much.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah, it's just scale, right? So we would never fly into a tornado. That'd be a really bad idea. But we are releasing instruments, you know, that we're not swarming, but we're releasing 20-25 dropsons in a storm. We are, you know, going out there, but yeah, except it's a really small eye, you know, when you break through the eye wall, you can see the stadium effect. So you could tell there's curvature, but scale-wise, it's just different.
Yep. And another thing too is the amount of rapid formation that you get on a tornado and the intensity. I'm from the Midwest. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. So I grew up in areas that had to deal with tornadoes and everything. And with us, the reason that we're doing this again is disaster preparedness, to prepare you. With a tornado, you may get no warning or like 30 seconds of warning. With a hurricane, if there's a Cat 5 hurricane coming and you're still there, you've known about it for about a week. So it's a different animal. These storms are larger. The level of destruction isn't as intense as a tornado necessarily, but you know they're coming. So when you have early warning for something, it's do your best to try to heed that warning.
Now, they do sometimes have tornadoes in them. Like Milton was a great example. When it made landfall, there was upwards of 50, I think, tornadoes that happened across the peninsula of Florida. So they can have tornadoes, but it's still different.
Yeah. That's great. This is a really interesting question. and it's about the relationship between you and the airplane. Do you feel a special connection to the aircraft, and you must really have to trust that? What is that connection like?
I've been flying them for a long time, and I love the C-130. It's a great aircraft. It's very smooth. It's very stable. It's very predictable. But yes, there is definitely an amount of trust that goes into it. But in addition to just the familiarity with how many hours I've spent driving one, there's a whole slew of folks that go in behind it, like the fact that I can take off in the airplane and know that maintenance has done their job and done all the different levels of inspection on all the bolts and all the wing boxes and all the fittings, and everything is greased and lubricated and inspected and triple checked. So when we're going in and doing our mission, it's not just the folks in the green suits that you see out front that are going into it. For every 1 hour that we're in the air, there's like at least 10 hours of people behind the scenes making sure that aircraft is safe and ready to fly day in and day out. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And after you've been flying in it for a while, you can kind of predict its behavior, I feel like sometimes. Where we sit in the weather seat, we're right by the propellers, so we hear a lot of noise, and there are just certain whirring like noises that you can hear, and I just know when I hear that we're probably about to drop or we're going to go up. And so you can kind of just, based on what you're hearing, you can predict what it's going to do after you've been flying a few of them.
Wow, that's fantastic. There's a good question here about kind of other agencies that you might be partnering with. So how does the work of the 53rd compare to NOAA hurricane flights? Is it similar aircraft? Do you work together at all? Is there a relationship there?
Yeah, so NOAA has hurricane hunters also. They've got 3 aircraft for the hurricane mission, and they fly 2 P-3s, which are very similar to the C-130 in the sense that it's a propeller aircraft. It's got 4 propellers as well. And they also fly through at the 10,000 feet that we fly through. If we can be in there at the same time, if we are in there at the same time, then they'll deconflict by either, we always have to be at 10, so they'll be at 8 or they'll be at 12. NOAA does a lot of research. They can add instrumentation because they also use their planes for more than hurricane hunting and more than winter storm as well. There's a lot of different like mission types that they have, and so they can change sensors out. And then they also have a G4, so a Gulfstream that flies higher, so they can do synoptic flights. They can go up to like 45,000 feet and be dropping sondes all along the way, which is way higher than the C-130 or the P-3 can get. So that's great because it gets a larger amount of the atmosphere just by the sense that they're flying higher. Yeah. What's synoptic? Oh, that's a good question. So I said the synoptic mission. So essentially it's all of our winter storm missions are considered synoptic. So the hurricane flights where we're going through the eye, we call that a fixed mission. So it's just one that's mostly a pre-planned route, and we're planning to drop sondes at specific locations.
Cool.
Did y'all have anything else to add with the relationship with NOAA?
The way that we're structured is a little bit different too. We have 10 WC-130Js to their 2 P-3s. Their P-3 is a better sensor platform. They have way more advanced sensors than we do for a lot more of the different scientific research portions, but there's only 2 of them. We have 10 and enough crews to theoretically fly 3 different storms on 3 different locations. The way that I kind of look at it is we do the majority of the sort of quote unquote like grunt work of like going out and getting and covering the majority of the stuff that goes in and day out to the Weather Channel and to build the stuff that people are reacting to for the warnings. They have much more of a research, like long-term scientific and data gathering mission, but they also do what we do. It's just on a much smaller scale. Like the 2 aircraft that they have, without what we do, they wouldn't be able to cover 80% of the taskings. So we do the majority of the stuff that goes to the Weather Channel and into the alerts and everything else. They do about 20% plus a whole lot of other ancillary research that we don't have the equipment to basically do.
And I think that goes back to why our mission fits into the military so well, because the military does have access to so many airplanes, so much maintenance, and they do have the infrastructure built to have 10 airplanes and fly very often.
Yep. That's great. I'm glad you mentioned the airplanes again, because there are a ton of people in the comments talking about how much they love C-130s, which is great. We like to see that. That's why we're here. So one of their questions is, what plane could or would maybe one day replace the C-130 in this mission, or anything else that you think is relevant to why this particular airplane is so well suited to this and gives us its strength. You've touched on a lot of that already, but maybe if you could elaborate a little more on that.
To my knowledge, at this point, there's not anything else on the design board that can do the type of thing that we do with the C-130. So I think the J model is, for the foreseeable future, going to be what we use for this mission. Like what we talked about with the straight wing and the blown wing and the powered lift and everything else and the low speed stability. It's really well suited for what we do, and I think it's going to be doing it for a long time.
Fantastic. There is a really good question here, and it leads to something I kind of wanted to ask, how long some of your typical missions are, but also what you're doing on some of those longer flights. Like one of the questions here is, how's the food? Is it better than airline food? But also, what are the bathrooms like on this airplane? That kind of day-to-day stuff. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about those kind of experiences.
So our missions, I'd say on average, they average out to be 9 hours, but we do have missions upwards of 12 hours long. I think you were saying earlier you've been on one that was, 12 hours and almost 13?
Just shy of 13.
So they get very long, so we do bring our own food. There is a bathroom on the plane, thankfully, because these missions are so long. So yes, we do have access to meals and bathrooms on the plane. As the weather officer, time for me at least, this might be the same for you, it feels like it flies by sometimes because we are so focused on the numbers and the data and making sure the drop-ons go out when and where they're supposed to, and talking back and forth with the National Hurricane Center. And so sometimes you'll look up and 4 hours have passed, and it does not feel like that at all.
Yeah, I would say the food is better than airline food because you get to pick what you're bringing, I guess. I've eaten breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a flight before with an early takeoff, and then you're landing an 8 a.m. takeoff, 8 p.m. land. You're like, well, I guess I'll just eat everything on here.
Wow.
And sometimes with a 3 a.m. takeoff, you eat breakfast twice.
Oh, that's unbelievable. So you mentioned the drop-ons again, and some people are asking a little bit more about how those work. Are they recoverable? Do they send data remotely? Is there a little more you can tell us about how those operate?
Yeah, so they send data back to the aircraft every quarter second. So the Loadmaster drop-on operator can literally watch it on their computer screen as it's falling down. And then when it makes contact with the water, it'll terminate. And then they'll process it up. They are unfortunately not recoverable, but they are designed such that there's a parachute. They're designed such that there's a hole in the top to get it to sink faster, to get it out of the food chain.
Fantastic. I would like to ask just one more thing real quick here. There's a very interesting, I know we're almost out of time, but just one more question here that's a little bit philosophical, if I may, that showed up in the chat. On a human level, what has experiencing hurricanes from this perspective taught you about life, if there's anything? That's a pretty big question, but if anybody wants to offer something, I'm just curious.
Probably, especially when dealing with the bigger storms, that you don't get to make the weather, but you do get to make your way through it. So similar to a lot of things in life, you can't deal with the fact that there may be a Cat 5 heading towards the coast, or you may have to go fly through it, but you can try to pick the least worst way through. So when something crappy comes up in life, basically accept it for what it is, and then control the things you can control, and just wait until you have clearer skies on the other end.
Well, I know I threw a maybe unfair question at you, but that was a very beautiful answer. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you for being here. I want to close just with a brief sneak peek at our next aviation lecture. Many of you know, and this is maybe hard to say, but this is the 25th anniversary this year of the tragic events of 9/11. So our next lecture is going to talk a little bit about that, explore some stories from that day, events at National Airport and the Pentagon. That will be on September 10th of this year at the Udvar-Hazy location. So registration is not open yet, but it will be soon, so please stay tuned to our website for that. I also want to mention that my colleague, Dr. Matt Schindel, will be hosting our final Exploring Space lecture called Our Future on Mars on June 3rd here at the museum. You can register for that now. We do want to hear from y'all. If you want to participate in a quick survey to tell us what you thought about tonight, please do that. You can do so with that QR code there. And thank you so much again to the sponsor for this evening, to the Amelia Earhart Lecture in Aviation History, RTX. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us, and please join me in saying thank you to our guests one last time. Thank you. Good night.